Welcome to the Evansville Wartime Museum. Lunch and share, third Thursday of the month. We're going to start with prayer today. So if you would, take your caps off and bow your heads, please. Lord, our holy God, our Father, our Creator, we thank you for this day that you've made. We thank you for the food that we're about to eat. We thank you for this place where we could gather, and we thank you for all the volunteers. We thank you for the Bronstein Foundation, which supports this program. We give great thanks for all those who served, all those who are serving. And in this last week, we remember in 1945, on 8th of May, victory in Europe, and the great celebration that happened at that time, and yet the war still continued. And we give thanks that that war ended. And we ask for blessings upon the leaders of our nation, and that they may lead us in the ways that you would have us be led. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Please stand while we have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Larry, Dad, please come and lead us in the national anthem.
Thank you, John. Feel free to join me. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's glass gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, Larry. Mark Browning will have some announcements and introduce our speaker.
A couple things. Thanks again for being here. Appreciate your attendance and appreciate your continued support to this event. I want to bow our heads for a minute. Bob Giolito, he was part of the Newburgh Museum, and he'd always sit over here for the last 2 or 3 years. We lost him in October of last year. He was a Green Beret. I'd like to just bow our heads for 5 seconds or so in memory of Bob. Thank you. He was a great participant here. Mission Barbecue has free lunch for you this Saturday. If you're a veteran, I think it's all low calorie, so you don't have to. Next thing is, I think last time we had our beginning of a bus trip, and you're more than welcome. You can go up and sign up for the next bus trips. The bus trip was sponsored or created by Donna Bone, and she only worked on it for a couple years, and we drove buses by close to 50 places that were important in World War II. And so she has the picture on the bus us of what it looked like in World War II, and then you look at what it looks like now. Very informational, and I've talked to several people that attended the bus trip, and they liked it. The next one is on the 5th of June, and that's sold out already. In the future, though, we're going to have it on a Saturday, July 26th, August 30th, and November 1st. It'll be 10 o'clock till 12. It'll be the same route, and Jason Holmes is in the ambulance back there, and he attends, and he's going to give part of it as well. If you looked at the sign on Highway 41, it was a picture of a B-29, and it's on the right across near World War St. George's Road, and it says Warbird Summer, and that's what we're talking about here. We've already had one. We had about 900 people that came out here, and 66 flew in the Warbird, and about 700 and 900 crawled through the Warbird. And I think you mostly need to be younger age to crawl through that thing. There's only 2 left in the world flying. It's one like the Enola Gay that dropped the atom bomb, and they explained everything. They were very instructional, and if you missed it, there may be another one called Fifi that shows up at Tri-State Aero in the next month. It's had a bad engine, so it may show up and it may not. We'll have other warbirds. We for sure have the Hueys in August, and it's very popular. They're Vietnam era, and you can go on a ride on that. It's a little bit more reasonably priced. And then in the month of September, we have a thing called a B-25. It was very instrumental in World War II. It was part of Doolittle's run. It's called Champagne Gal, is that the name of that plane. I'd like you to continue to tell your friends and neighbors about this place. We're going to be on midday with Mike, and many of us are going to be talking about that, and hopefully we didn't flub our words up too much. But that will be on May 24th. I think that's a Friday, or that's a Saturday, or whatever date is. It's May 24th. It goes from 12:30 to 1, and then it's on the 26th, and I think that is Monday. But anyway, those 2 days, 12:30 to 1, have some people watch that because it summarizes a lot of what we do here at the museum without me telling you. And Mike has done a good job, and they had their photographer here for a long time. So try to remember that, the 24th and 26th, when you're eating your lunch, you just pay attention to that. Now today we got a special event. Can these ladies come up on stage? And Homer, can you come up on stage? And we need a photographer out there, somebody she hires a photographer. They're not paying him much, but he's going to do a good job. This is first time they've ever done this, and this check is a real check. It's $500, and if you go buy a house or sell a house with one of these realtors, they will give you $500 to give it to the charity of your choice. So Miss Homer here, Miss Homer right there in the red, she's a volunteer here, used to be a volunteer at the Audubon Museum for about 20 years, and now she's a volunteer here. But she bought a house, and she bought it from the McClintock Group, and so the McClintock Group is very generous in giving, not necessarily to this charity, but a church or anything else if you buy or sell a house. So I know you probably all need a new house, and these are good realtors, and they'll give you their card, and they're all going to pay attention to Mr. McNiece today, and they're not going to sleep in the front row because I'm going to watch them, and we're going to quiz them afterwards. So why don't you say a word or two, Kara? This is the mayor's wife for 12 years, no longer the mayor, but you probably know of her.
Mark, we were confused. No, I am still married to the former mayor, but he's not the mayor. We are thrilled to be here with Team McClintock with FC Tucker MD, and this is just something we do. For everyone that buys a house, we put their name in the drawing. If you draw them out, then they get to pick the charity. So you're really here because Homer Mestrick was generous, and she actually nominated you twice. And yeah, only one once. But so we really appreciate it. And I almost hate to say this. I have been out here but none of the rest of the team had ever been out there. So, oh wait, Susan says she's been here. So it was a real good opportunity for us to come and see what you're doing. So we appreciate it. Appreciate what you do.
Thank you, Homer. Thank you. These young ladies here are going to become frequent flyers out here too. They can bring their kids, their aunts, uncles, grandkids, or anybody, and we would love them to come out here. These docents here are smart as whips, and you would learn something. So, and they may buy a house. I'm telling you, they all need shelter. What have I forgotten in announcements? Tell me, people in the red, I know I've forgotten something, but anyway, we've got a ton of things going on this year, and I just can't thank you enough for your support. Remember what's in your garage, what's in your attic. Those things, some of those things need to be here, and your friends, they're going to send them to Goodwill. We need to filter that things. Right now we have 1,400 or 14,000 items, and there's 3 students up there working on them now. We have USI students. We have a student now from Ferdinand. We have several signature students, and we have Central High School Heritage students that scan and index whatever you bring in or photograph it, then it digitizes and you can see it on the internet on our website. So it's a tremendous process that should have been done 50 years ago, but at least we're doing it now. And don't you let things go to Goodwill. Let us have first shot at them, please. Okay, this is a gentleman that is in my class in medical school, and he was married to a young lady here. Could the Millers stand up, please? These are a brother named Butch Miller, and he's a brother to Nancy. I get everything mixed up. He's a brother to Nancy Miller, OR nurse in Indianapolis, and married to this young man here. She died prematurely about 5 years ago, and she was a classmate of mine and many other people in the crowd. But Bill, you see some of his credentials there, and we're not going to go over them because they're too long. He's only a Rose-Hulman graduate. He's got so many degrees, and he's been chairman of a lot of things in anesthesia. There's an anesthesia museum west of Chicago, Schaumburg or something, about 30 miles. It's absolutely superb, and he studies archaeology. He's much more an egghead than me, and but he knows so many things that you will find out in a few minutes. So he's going to talk about the bubbles in your blood.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction. Thanks to all of you for showing up today for a topic that may seem a little odd at first glance, but we'll try and make good use of your next 50 minutes or so. So I'm going to be talking about something, and I'll use a variety of different names for the same thing. So the earliest name for this is caisson disease. We'll talk about that. Decompression illness, decompression sickness, diver's disease, aerobilosis, the bends. Any of you watch Sea Hunt as a kid?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah? So that then you've learned a lot about at least the word the bends from that period of time. And never an official name for it, but the too much nitrogen disease is kind of another way to think about this for all these different names for the same entity. Now, expect this afternoon to get some physics, a little bit of engineering, a little bit of medicine. There is a bit of a tenuous but extant military connection here. There will be a fair amount of history associated with this, and in what I understand may be a first for this series, there's going to be a little bit of fashion this morning too. So we'll see how it all goes. So first off, we're going to have just a little bit of review of some physics here, pressure equivalence reviews. And so we can see here at the top one, and I put there standard atmospheric pressure. And if you follow down through the various pounds per square inch and bars and stuff like that, you'll get to the bottom and you'll see with those last two, if you're about 33 feet underwater, then you've got an amount of pressure around you equivalent roughly to what we've got around us right now. So in Evansville, if we look at our pressure today in terms of pounds per square inch, we're about 14.5 because we're up a little bit from sea level. If we were in Denver, that number would be more like 12. So it does vary somewhat with where you are, but around us all the time, we've got some atmospheric pressure pushing around us, and if we go underneath water, then that pressure is going to increase. Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit about gauge pressure, and atmospheric pressure, and absolute pressure. So we've got pressure all around us, and then if we put pressure on top of it, then that's gauge pressure. But if we go all the way down to a complete vacuum, that's the absolute pressure. And I'll try to be careful when I'm using some words here. I'll remind us that we've got air around us all the time. About 21% of it is oxygen. Most of the rest of it is nitrogen. And it's that nitrogen that we have around us that becomes the real topic that we're covering here today. There's bits of other gases, but for this purpose, nitrogen's the one that counts. So let's look at a few examples here. So I drove here today. I figured you all did. At least for my car, I'm supposed to have 32 psi in my tires. Maybe you do too. So how many standard atmospheres of that is that, and how many feet of water? So if we do those calculations, you've got a little over 2 atmospheres gauge in your tires, or the equivalent of being under about 74 feet of water. So when you get that and you get air squirting out of your tire, that's the equivalent pressure as if you were down around 74 feet underwater. So a little physics now. Henry's law. No one's glazed over yet. I'm really impressed. This is good. So Henry's law is named after William Henry. So here's an image from the early 1800s. And he writes in something that is fairly hard to interpret here, and it's easier to read here, that at constant temperature, then the pressure over a gas increases, the amount of gas dissolved in the liquid will increase proportionally. And then conversely, as the gas pressure decreases, the amount of gas dissolved in solution drops. Schnucks finest. So I have here a bottle of beverage, pineapple coconut, and as I look at it, there's maybe a bubble or two in it, but there's not really many bubbles that I can see in this. And as I push on this, even though it's plastic, it's hard to compress. So there's a bunch of pressure within this. So what that tells us then is that within the liquid within this bottle, and I'll tell you right above all of this and above this, there's a little bit of air here. It's not really air, it's carbon dioxide. So that's dissolved in here. Now, what's the pressure inside this bottle? It's room temperature, about what it would be. And in comparison, how does that compare to my tire outside? Well, there is the ideal gas law. I'm not going to derive this for you today, don't panic. But if you use that, then that will tell you that you've got probably 3-ish atmospheres in here. Now, other reports have analyzed it, so you kind of get numbers from 2 to 3, but kind of more or less the same pressure, or maybe a little bit more than we have in my tire out there. Now, what happens if I open the bottle? Okay, so there's a little bit of hiss there. So what we see is some gas going out. And what do we see within? We see a bunch of little bubbles that have already formed. And so what we have here is a fluid that had a gas in it under high pressure, now being released, and that gas comes out of solution, and so we've got all these bubbles in here. Now, let's suppose that I shake it up real well. Bottle number 2. Blueberry lemonade. So let's suppose I shake this up really well. Does the pressure go up? Does it go down? Does it stay the same? Well, using the ideal gas law that I showed you earlier, N doesn't change. R is a constant, it doesn't change. Temperature maybe went up a little bit, not very much. The volume didn't change, so the pressure really didn't change. But what did happen is I created a bunch of little bitty bubbles in here. Now the little bitty bubbles become important for a guy like this one. This is an image of Robert Boyle, of Boyle's Law. So writing here in a treatise in 1662, what he talked about, among other things, was that if you have a container that has a gas in it that has both pressure and volume, then if you move one, then that changes the other. So pressure times volume equals pressure times volume. And what that tells you then is that where before I had only the gas up above, if I've got a bunch of little bubbles in here, then as the pressure goes down, the little bubbles get bigger, and then it gets really fuzzy and fizzy and goes all over creation. So, a couple of laws to begin with. You don't have to memorize this. There will be no questions at the end, but it'll help you understand a little later on. Now, that's enough for physics for the moment. Let's talk about caissons. The word comes from the Middle French. It means large box. You can ignore the top part of it and go down to the bottom that says a large watertight structure used to provide for construction in areas underwater. So it's opened at the bottom and filled with air under pressure to allow for construction underwater. And it's preceded by the use of diving bells that were in use by 1500 or so. So, thanks Jennifer for this use. So if we have a diving bell, so it's closed on the top and open on the bottom, and we would lower this into a quantity of water and keep lowering it, well, the gas in here can't escape. The water would come up into the diving bell. The gas above it, the air above it, gets increased in pressure, but there's still room that someone could have their head up here. They have pretty little to do it, but they would have their head up here and they could breathe and allow someone then to do some work coming in and out of the bell. So fairly early technology, but recognizing that air can be compressed, but it provides some space to work with. So the initial description of a caisson is attributed to Denis Pepin in 1691, and he described injecting fresh air into a diving bell by means of a strong bellows. And so then by doing that, the bell interior could remain empty and dry, and then they could be lowered down and you could work beneath that. Here's a description, 1778, showing a diagram of what this might look like. And you can see up in the top here, we've got a pump mechanism that can pump air into this diving bell for making use in bridge construction as early as the 1770s. About 50 years later, here's another patent, 1830, as we continue to improve this mechanism. This could be used to facilitate excavating, sinking, and mining where danger from water is to be apprehended. So if you're trying to work down and down and down and water starts coming in, this kind of technology can be helpful to you in continuing your project. Here's a word from the French, reporting from about 1840 in French technology, applications for compressed air for drilling mine shafts and other work. This is a diagram of Trager's mechanism. You can see here on the right, this is the pump that goes up and down. You've got then a mechanism and a valve here that you can pump air into this chamber here and allow work to excavate at the bottom of this caisson where otherwise water would come up in here and make it impossible to work. This continues to expand its work into the both Britain and Europe. If we make a guess at how tall we think this guy down here is, and we say, well, I don't know, he's maybe 5'6", or a little shorter than, and kind of stretch this out, then that would suggest that he's working under, I don't know, 40 feet down under the water surface in an area where, while there's some water down here, he's able to still work and have an atmosphere that he's able to breathe in to do that. Now, the earliest I can find for caisson technology in the United States dates from 1853-54. This is a little bit from the American Railroad Journal, and in it it's a description of the use of a caisson in railroad bridge construction. And it talks about the Wilmington and Manchester Railroad crossing the Great PD River. That's what we call it. So here in red, so we got South Carolina here, North Carolina here, and so this is the path of the Wilmington and Manchester Railroad. And here in a little bit of blue, this is the Great PD River. And so we're talking about right around here, for the first use that at least I can run across for the use of this technology written up in the United States. Probably was used before then, but this is where it's written up. Describes then the use of the caisson to clear sand and the trunk of a cypress tree for the foundation of a railroad bridge. Interestingly, the pump technology from this comes from a foundry. It's fairly well known in New York, the West Point Foundry. It's across from that other place named West Point. And so this is a technology that was used here in the United States. I think the first use here. Now this, in the 1850s, it clearly makes advances then, because pretty soon we've got a couple of really important bridges that are pretty big that are constructed in the periods from roughly 1870 to 1880. The first of these is the Eads Bridge over the Mississippi River at St. Louis. It's constructed 1867 to 1874. It's constructed on 4 piers. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And these piers then go down and down and down, and they have to be, it's got tremendous weight on it. This thing was used, it used to have railroads, engines and cars going back and forth across this. And so what you have here is, to build this thing, you gotta find a way to get these piers on something solid to hold everything up. The other one that's built roughly at the same time is the Brooklyn Bridge, crossing the East River from Manhattan Island to Brooklyn. Its construction is 1870 to 1883, and so it overlaps somewhat the Eads Bridge in St. Louis. Now it's a little different because it's a 2-pier bridge, and this main span is a fair amount longer. So this is like 1,600 feet across here versus 500 something for the Eads Bridge. It's also higher. You've got more room under here for your ocean-going vessels that would potentially need to come across here versus what you would have with the Eads Bridge, which was traffic up and down the Mississippi. And so you've got 2 bridges here built roughly 1870s, 1880s, both of whom need to have technology to build piers to be able to make these bridges, build them. They open, then you can still cross both of them. They're still there and they're still working, so they're remarkable engineering feats. Here is underneath these what had to be done to build the piers for these. So this is a drawing out of the French literature that looks at the caisson work underneath the east piling, the east pier for the Eads Bridge. And you can see here there's a lot of weight on top of this, and if you get all the way down to the bottom, here's a couple of guys, probably a lot more than that there, but they're working underneath. And what they're doing is they're excavating the sand here, trying to get this down to bedrock. And that's kind of what they're trying to accomplish here. But you can see that it's a long way down here, and the further you get down, the more pressure you have to have within this caisson to keep the water out. Is that making sense so far? Okay. Heads are mainly up and down here. That's good. And here is then a similar, this is a drawing, 1870. This is a drawing of the base of one of these Brooklyn Bridge caissons. You've got workmen here. Here is one preparing to leave, and you can see that he's climbing a ladder to get up into here, and that's the way he's going to be leaving this chamber where there's a lot of extra pressure, because that's what you have to keep the water out. Now, back to some physics. So the caisson disease, decompression illness, then is fundamentally an application of Henry's law. And it refers to the nitrogen entering and then leaving solution in the blood and tissues. Remember, air is like 78% nitrogen. We've all got some nitrogen dissolved in us. No big deal. Until the pressure changes. Now, if you decompress slowly, the nitrogen comes out, gets exhaled, no big deal. But if decompression occurs too quickly and too much, then the nitrogen comes out of solution and bubbles of nitrogen gas form, and that's the problem. Back to my soda bottle example here. Think of that, all of a sudden the pressure disappears or gets really down low, then that nitrogen that's in you, something happens to it. And Henry's law says it's going to turn into little bubbles. Now, let's suppose you have some little bubbles. Is that a big deal? And the answer is maybe. Maybe not, too. If they're small enough and the involved tissue bed isn't that big of a deal, then it's not too much of a problem. And venous bubbles, remember the blood comes from your body, comes back through the right side of your heart, comes through the lungs. The lungs are really a good filter. So if you've got some little bubbles and not too many of them, no big deal. If you're on the arterial side, the red side, then that becomes more of a bubble. Related to this, then, is Boyle's law that says these little bubbles, if the pressure keeps going down, those little bubbles will get bigger. And that can be a problem, and then cause obstruction of blood flow somewhere, and depending on when that is, then that's where you run into big problems. Now, clinically, this manifests in a number of different ways. You can have joint pain or pain near a joint. It's been described with terms including the bends, which may last for days, the niggles, which may last for hours. You can have changes in neurologic function, movement, headache, higher functioning. If you get cerebellar being affected, then you get the staggers. And so these are all manifestations of it. Balance and hearing problems, if it gets from breathlessness, from the bubbles in the lung, it's called the chokes. You can get some skin marbling, malaise, a series of different things. Trigère, writing in 1845, probably Jacques Trigère, he did some work on the Eiffel Tower, so his name is up there. He was a pretty well-known guy. Writes about this, and in this article, looking at it, and I've just had some of it translated for us here. So he makes comments that under these conditions, people being in this caisson here, everyone talks through his nose, which becomes increasingly noticeable with increasing pressures. One miner who was deaf heard more distinctly than other miners when in compressed air. Miners climb steps better in compressed air. Everyone loses their ability to whistle at 3 atmospheres. 2 workers, after spending 7 hours straight in the compressed air, have experienced severe pain half an hour after leaving the shaft. But friction massage with alcohol dispelled these pains, and the workers resumed work the following days. I don't think the friction massage had anything to do with it, but that's just reporting the news here. Here's another description, 2 physicians writing in 1854, writing about 64 miners who worked under conditions up to 4.5 atmospheres. So we're really getting further and further down. He reports on physiological changes. in different atmospheres. They spent at least an hour in the chamber and then decompressed over 15 minutes. He said he did this, returns home, and then all of a sudden gets a severe pain in his left arm and shoulder, and then seems to have emphysema in these areas. Now, emphysema in this usage means kind of like little crackly things under your fingers, which is where you get some gas collected there. Next day in his usual condition, except joint pains that lasted for several days. Of these 64 workers, 47 withstood the elevated pressures fairly well. 25 had to be discharged, 2 died. Could be pretty real. Says compression is well tolerated, but you can get pulmonary and cerebral congestion. The risk is more of a problem with the older subjects. And he poses a kind of a thought question. Would it not be possible to have 2 locks? So one that you would get into, the pressure would be increased, and then you would leave it. And then you would have another one that you could leave and then be decompressed to get back to the atmospheric pressure. He makes an important point here that the bad effects of decompression are directly proportionate to its speed. So if you do this slow enough and let the nitrogen move out of the bloodstream, give it enough time, then everything is fine. The danger does not lie in entering a shaft containing compressed air, nor in remaining a longer or shorter time. Decompression only is dangerous. Pay only when leaving. And so Trigger, and a later writer says, one case justifies the expectation that immediate recompression would be a more certain and prompt means of relief. Well, we see the continued use of hyperbaric atmospheres in a whole range of industrial uses. The Eads Bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge I mentioned, remarkably large caissons, and there were physicians appointed for both of these projects. Here is a collection of data from a series of different projects in the United States, in Europe, various rivers, and you can see various depths here too. Many of these are in the 80s. The Eads project here in St. Louis is notable because it's going down to 127. You get some data on the illness here and some on the mortality. We can see there was significant mortality in both St. Louis and in Brooklyn. Now, we don't have denominators on any of this, so I don't know what the relative risk of this is. But the 2 physicians here, Wright, Jaminet, writing about Illinois and St. Louis Bridge, which is really the Eads Bridge. And he puts together this data here, and you can get information on this. You can see that here in tens of minutes, you'll start to see problems. And some of these can be really significant in terms of the nature of the problem. This is Andrew Smith, another physician. He was the company physician for the Brooklyn Bridge project. And his data would suggest that you can see similar kinds of concerns here, although maybe, don't know for sure, a little less in terms of the incidence. What do they suggest for preventative measures? Be sure things are okay. They had some recommendations on how long you should take to compress versus decompress. Notice they kind of had this backwards. You'd like to be slower on your decompression here. And if you look at Smith, he suggests, well, maybe having a medical lock would be a good thing as a method to try and treat patients. He talks about this in a paper that he puts together, and he says here, I propose to call the caisson disease. This is a use, I think the first use of caisson disease as a descriptor for what's going on here. He talks about it, he describes it. he goes on to then talk about what he would propose as putting together a recompression chamber for the treatment of caisson disease. Been suggested earlier, suggested here again, but does not employ recompression as a treatment with the Brooklyn Bridge project. Now, let me talk for just a minute. I've used the term caisson disease, decompression illness. Probably, and certainly those of you like me that want to see how as a kid, probably the bends is something that makes sense to you. So where does that word come from? It does not come from Lloyd Bridges. It was before Lloyd Bridges. So this is an article from 1908. And in it, this talks about where does the word bends come from? What's the origin of this? And he goes on to talk about this, and he says, well, I think that this has to do with kind of a fashion of the style. Here we go, this is fashion. That was derisively called the Grecian bend. And when they saw someone walking with this fashion style among women, but one of their colleagues, then they would say, well, he's doing the Grecian bend. Now, the guy that wrote this was the general manager of the bridge company, and he has initials WT here. And I'm pretty sure that means it's William Taussig. So, immigrant from Prague, he's a physician, abolitionist, a judge, and importantly, the general manager of the St. Louis Bridge Company. So I think probably this is a valid piece of information on where the bends comes from. And here are a couple of images from a piece of music called the Grecian Bend. Now, this music is published in 1868, so a year before the start of the Eads Bridge project. So let me have a run through this. Good evening to you one and all, I hope I don't intrude, dressed in this quiet fashion, pray do not think me crude. I always study le follet, the fashion to amend, so introduce you ladies to this graceful Grecian bend. The Grecian bend, as I now show, you must admit is all the go. The head well forward and the body you extend to be perfect in the Grecian bend. And so I think that's probably what it is. Well, another person that becomes important in this, and this is really from the French literature here, is Paul Bert. Does a lot of physiology and experimental stuff. And he both reviews the published data and puts it all together, and also demonstrates that nitrogen bubbles can be formed from decompression. Now, construction goes on. And in planning by 1885, there was plans for the Hudson River tunnels. So this was a tunnel that goes from New Jersey to Manhattan, that's the other side of the Brooklyn Bridge, to provide a connection for trains. This is kind of upside down or kind of sideways, but what you have here is Manhattan here, you've got New Jersey over here, and then this is the Hudson River tunnels. Because you can see you had a bunch of rail lines coming in here, and then you just hit the edge of the river, and well, what do you do? So that was then why they wanted to construct the Hudson River tunnels, to provide a path that you could get there rather than having ferries all around that you had to use all the time. So Hudson River tunnels. Work here by by Moore, talking about the use of caissons and compressed air. You know, you can go down for up here, but then you kind of go sideways-ish for the tunneling. And he makes a note here that this is a death rate of, did you read this out? Death rate of about 25% per annum. Well, I wanted to do something important to make this better. And so he talks then about the difference that recompression makes to this. Here is Seward Erdman, and he suggests aeropathy, didn't catch on very well, but he also discusses the use of active treatment for episodes of compressed air illness. Active treatment, the only active treatment of compressed air illness, which is at once the rational treatment and the most efficient, is recompression, and especially constructed lock, the medical air lock. And he goes on to talk about that and how it works. Well, we figured out to treat it, how do we prevent it? And this is an article, a title coming from the British literature, 1908 to 24, and they talk about through their extensive experiment with goats and decompressing that they identified and made recommendations on compression, decompression to try to avoid problems. You can see by 1924, this is at 15, it's adopted by the U.S. Navy, and indeed, this is the latest edition that I can run across, the U.S. Navy Diving Manual, that will provide guidance and recommendation. Now, in the 1930s, it was also recognized that decompression illness could occur during high altitude flights and unpressurized aircraft. This was not really new information. Here is another article by Robert Boyle I mentioned earlier, and in it he reports on the experiments on the effects of decreasing ambient pressure on ducks, vipers, frogs, kittens, shellfish, and scaled fish. And he talks about formation of bubbles. By 1937, the value of oxygen treatment was recognized because if you've got oxygen that you're breathing in, then that leaves more room for the nitrogen to come out than if you're just breathing air. And so if you take oxygen treatment and accompany it with recompression, then that's a better way to go. By the 1960s, the experience was that if you go up to 2 atmospheres, then you had an incidence of maybe 0.5%, but for most part that they were all fairly mild. And the recommendation then became that you treat the bends, you treat decompression illnesses with just enough recompression to be effective, and then you slow down your decompression. One of the problems that was seen earlier, even though it was recognized it would be nice to do this a little more slowly, is that the guys in the lock wanted to get out of there more quickly. And so they might just kind of kick that valve a little bit to let the pressure decrease more quickly, but that created more problems. So it became recognized that you had to control this. They did find that if you were used to doing it on a regular basis, then it was a little bit less of a problem for you, at least for a week or two. How long do you need to worry? Hours, weeks, days? What's the relation to exercise? What's its relation to further decompression? All questions that needed to have some further explanation. This is work done in 1990, looking at the effects of decompression. You can see here precordial, subclavian. So what this is to use ultrasound technology to try and look for bubbles in a more sensitive method. And what comes out of this is that you can see that if you've got higher, if you change your decompression step, then if your steps are bigger, then you have more and a longer problem that can be out 6 or 7 hours. So who is at more risk for the development of caisson disease? Well, if you're doing this at more than 1 grade one gauge atmosphere, so you're more than 33 feet down, then it's more of a problem. If you're, I've used the term less young here rather than older, make that as you wish. But if you're over about your mid-30s, then there's an increased incidence, obesity, debilitation, injury. If you've had an episode of decompression sickness earlier, you're more at risk for it. If you've got a patent foraminal valley, how many of us have patent foraminal valleys in this room? Okay, about a quarter of you do. Because if you look just generally at adults, about a quarter of us have a patent foraminal valley. Not a big deal, unless you get a bunch of bubbles that are going to increase the pressure on the right side of your heart and open up that, then it becomes a problem. But it does increase your risk there. Human factors in decompression illness. Here is, it is clearly there are people who are at risk here. 4% of compressed air workers sustain 50% of the episodes. So it suggests that there are some risk factors, although this investigation suggested that age and obesity are not predictors. I'm not going to volunteer to find out. Now, what do you do if you've got a project that is really down there and it's going to take a while to get this taken care of? Can't just do it in a couple of hours. Maybe you can't do it in 8 hours. So this brings you to a topic of saturation diving. Now, remember, the problem is only when you're decompressing. It's no problem when you're there. You may not be able to whistle, but that's not the end of the world. So with saturation diving, you put divers down or workers down at elevated pressure for a period of days. And so this allows an extended period of work. And in fact, they may be just housed either underwater or in kind of a capsule up above, as long as they're maintaining the same pressure around them. So if you've been at 5 atmospheres and you're staying at 5 atmospheres, okay. Now you're still going to have to work through your decompression to eventually get out of that environment, but you can be in it for a period of time, and that's saturation diving. Now let's look at kind of the opposite end of it, spacewalks. International Space Station, up there somewhere. It's maintained at about 1 atmosphere and about normal gas concentrations. But if you're going out to do a spacewalk, well, that's a different environment. And so what happens there is that the spacesuits are at about 4.3 psi versus 14.7. Now that's going to be a problem because all those bubbles are going to come out, plus you're not going to have enough oxygen at a high enough partial pressure for you to do anything. So instead what happens is they go through a period of denitrogenation. So over a period of hours, then they get rid of the nitrogen in their system, and then you can lower the the oxygen concentration, while maintaining an adequate level of oxygen. And that's the environment for the spacewalk. Well, I'll close here in the next few minutes with a little bit on our current understanding of decompression sickness. This is from a 2022 review. And what we learned from this is that formation of small bubbles really fairly common after diving or rapid altitude exposures. Usually filtered out by the lungs, may or may not be symptomatic, often aren't. But if they get over to the arterial circulation, then that can be an issue with their effect depending on size and location. Arterial gas embolism, that can occur from expanding gas trapped in the lungs or coming across the patent foramen that we talked about earlier. Affected organ systems and manifestations. I don't expect you to read this in great detail, but I'll just note that you've got all different manifestations: musculoskeletal, cutaneous, spinal cord, inner ear, brain, cardiopulmonary, cardiovascular, constitutional. They differ in frequency, they differ in how they manifest, but all sorts of things can be affected by decompression illness. it's really a clinical differential. So you can't do a blood test on this, you can't take an x-ray and figure it out. But what it is if you're seeing these symptoms in a setting that makes sense, the diver that comes up and starts to have symptoms, well, you do need to get a differential from things that might be going on. So you've got a cardiopulmonary problem here. Well, it may be coming from the dive and decompression. It could also be that it's a near drowning or a heart attack that occurred. So you've got a variety of differentials. But this is where the physicians and others involved in the care of these people can sort through things to make a differential diagnosis and arrive at the determination that this is the difference. What do you do about it? Well, it kind of depends. Is this a serious problem or is this a mild problem? Ultimately, if it's a serious problem, then you need to get urgently evacuated to do recompression in a facility that can do that. Otherwise, then if it's not too bad, then a little bit of first aid stuff. You administer oxygen and then hopefully a little bit of analgesics, and then you'll have a good outcome. If you do need to recompress, here is a table taken from the U.S. Navy diving manual, and you can see here these green areas are when it's all oxygen. These bluish areas are when you have air, and so you get intermittent air breaks, as it's described, to try and to reduce the oxygen toxicity. You're coming down here to about 2.8 atmospheres, and the reason that's a limit is you get too much above that and you can get some neurologic toxicity from the pressure of the oxygen. But you can see here that you've got a decompression path that can eventually get you back up to the standard 1 atmosphere that you and I live in all the time. It's 11:49. Thanks for your attention.
We're opening up to questions now. I'll ask the first question if I may. Maybe something relevant for people here. Many of you taking air flights and they're up at 30 to 40,000 feet. And so if you're all of a sudden decompressed up there, your body doesn't like that. So the oxygen thing comes right out of the ceiling in front of you, and you got to put it on there because you're immediately change your oxygen and nitrogen content. And the pilot will try to get down to 10,000 feet in a safe time. And at that level, you're usually pretty safe. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, Bill, and that experience, that somebody could have that happen in the room?
So if you're talking about standard commercial flights, then you get on the plane, the doors are open, you close the doors, and you'll notice over a period of time that you got the ear thing going on, and you got to swallow to do that. And that's because when you're actually flying in a standard commercial airplane, you've got a pressure equivalent roughly of 6,000 to 8,000 feet. Now, that's a little bit above Denver, not a big deal for most people. Could be for some people with some pulmonary issues. But that is pretty much well tolerated by all of us. With the example here, then what you're doing, you know that if you're at 35,000 feet and the door opens, well, you got a lot of big problems going on. But one of the problems is then the nitrogen that's in your system is going to try to work its way out. If you've got then your oxygen mask on, and at this time your pilot is doing his best to get that plane down to 10,000 feet really quickly, then that helps ameliorate problems and allows the nitrogen to work its way out more rapidly than if you're breathing room air. So you're breathing 78% oxygen in, and so there's less of a gradient for the nitrogen to leave, 78% nitrogen. So if you're breathing then a high FiO2, that provides more of a gradient, so a faster removal of the nitrogen. And then once you get back down to 10,000 feet-ish, then that problem is resolved.
And we're sort of a World War II museum to some degree, and we had a thing called a B-29 out here last weekend, and that was the only pressurized plane in World War II owned by the United States, and that went up to 30,000 and even 40,000 feet. Our other three big bombers, the B-29, or B-24, the B-17 that's been here, the B-24 has been here. The other is there's a, what's the other one?
B-25.
But B-17 and some carriers, they're called a C-46 and a C-47. Those all flew the hump, and the hump went from 15,000, that's over the Himalayas, 15,000 to 25,000. The hump was only a 3-hour trip because they usually went 200 miles an hour and it's only 500 miles. So they weren't up there a long period of time. But then some people in the Atlantic Pacific were a long period of time, and these kids were up there, it's freezing up there, plus they're 20,000 feet, all they've got is oxygen. But can you talk about that? And I can't find much literature on all these guys who are up in the air all the time, and they weren't complaining of these things you're talking about, probably because medical experience didn't know a ton, but maybe I'm wrong. So can you speak to that, Bill, about all those warriors that are up in the air, 20,000 feet, a lot of them, for some extended periods of time? Did medical information not be good? Was there not good at diagnosis, or did they not have any problem?
Well, the shorter answer is, I don't know. So, like any good speaker, I'll make a guess here for you. So, we know that by the 1930s, information was out there about this. So, I've also seen pictures of airmen, pilots, others, having a mask on. So that would suggest that there was a way to deliver an elevated, inspired concentration of oxygen. So if you would start that, it takes a while from the plane to get from here to there. If you would start that early, then that would give you a period of time to try to get rid of some of the nitrogen because you've got that elevated gradient. So that might be the reason why it was apparently not too much of an issue if you had enough time to accomplish that while breathing 100% oxygen. That's a guess, but I think that it would make sense.
Other questions? And we have private
There
pilots.
may be someone out here who knows really the answer.
Anybody know the answer? We've got private pilots that once they get above 10, 12,000 feet, they get that oxygen on them. Because one of the things you said, you get a little crazy up there. You don't know, you can't do your duties. Not just, but if you can't do your duties, you could really have a problem. Yeah, Larry, so he's over here. Somebody got to bring a microphone. Does Larry had, and his dad was over at the hump, so he's probably going to have a hump question.
I'm Larry Head. I volunteer here. And my dad flew the hump in C-46s. And at one time, they sucked on oxygen with a pipe bit in their mouth with a tube of oxygen before the pilots had oxygen masks. They actually had a tube and they held a bit in their mouth to suck oxygen. Eventually, they used oxygen masks. But they didn't fly without oxygen.
They did or didn't? Did not fly without oxygen.
Early on, a few did, but they
Realized there was a problem.
Mr. Brett Holt's got a question.
Well, it's more of a comment. In Europe, the B-17s, they started using oxygen later in the war and finding out that it actually helped the pilots in their clarity. So they got to where at 12,000 feet they went on oxygen over there. And it was really crude to begin with, but that was actually on their checklist, or the pre-flight checklist, that they had to check that oxygen tank, make sure it was full.
Okay, we got a question over here.
Turn your phone.
I'm Roger Morgan, you can just call me confused. I watched a show on TV not long ago where they were trying to fish a car out of a lake, and the altitude was 7,000 feet. and they made a big deal about how much more dangerous it was starting out at 7,000 feet to get the bends. Can you explain that to me?
I can do some guessing at it. So what you're doing if you're starting out 7,000 feet is your atmospheric pressure is different. So it's not one atmosphere, it's going to be, gosh, I don't know, 0.75, 0.8 atmospheres. So you're starting out at a different level. And so, but your percentage is the same, but what that means is that the partial pressure of oxygen is going to be lower there as compared to Evansville. And so that gives you, at least in terms of oxygenation, less reserve that you've got to deal with. That may be part of the answer, but I don't know is that the complete answer. But maybe if you're about that much less confused, then it's good.
If you look at there's a review on TV, and we've got another one here, a review on TV on the Brooklyn Bridge, and one of the caissons there is 67 feet down, the other's about 35 feet. And if you look at the bend's history, a lot less problems at the 35 feet. When they had to go 65 feet, because you have to decompress and get 35 or 34 or less or more. So the ones at 67 feet had a terrible problem with the bends, more than the other caissons. So these bridges just went up everywhere. Look, we had one in St. Louis, and these guys like this, like that, and that's what he did that song about, is like this. And you're like that the rest of your life. You're like that. You get stuck. And so they call you the bends. It wasn't reversible after a while. They just terrible posture. Is that right, Bill?
Well, it can be, because remember these little bubbles, and if they happen to end up on the arterial side and you're occluding neurological vessels, for example, then yeah, that can be a lifelong problem.
Well,
I didn't talk about osteonecrosis. That can be another manifestation of it, and so that can be another reflection that could result in some bone changes over time.
Your picture of that lady, one was like this and one was straight up. Was this the lady you were singing about?
That's the lady. I don't know her name. But that was the fashion of the bends, which was the latest.
To bend over as a woman, you're supposed to walk like that?
Well, you looked at the dresses, right? Okay? Now, I know none of the women around here would ever wear high heel shoes or anything like that. That would be an issue. But the fashion, and it refers to a magazine, Le Follet, which was a French fashion magazine. So this was sort of the latest in style. It had I should have given you the second verse of that too, but it talks about a woman and having a giant bustle behind, and then having to have a posture to work through all this. And it describes this woman who tried to get on the stage, and she did, but little boys made fun of her because of the way that she was walking. And then she had to pay extra because it took so much room to get this dress in the stagecoach. So, but that's where that's the connection there.
Yeah, speak in right in there like this. Hold it right to your mouth, like that.
Okay, some of the things you're talking about, what happened to Payne Stewart, isn't it? He died flying with a plane because they all lost their compression or oxygen.
I don't know the answer.
He's that famous golfer that they had an automatic pilot. There wasn't anybody alive in the plane, and I think he's over North Dakota. And the other fighter planes got next to him, tried to talk to him, couldn't talk to him. I think I don't know what the final was at. Somebody else would know. It's a golfer here, but I think they lost compression in the plane, but had automatic pilot, so it kept flying. I don't know him more than that.
He was shot down, I think. I think they had to shoot his plane down.
Oh.
And for scuba divers in here, I mean, I scuba dive, and I'm telling you, you get down there, you gotta look at all those daggone charts, and you've gotta stop at all these different levels. It's a real pain, but you don't want to get all this bend stuff. But all the scuba divers have to do that when they go more than 34 feet down for an extended period of time. You gotta play all these charts, and it is a pain. They make you go through all these classes. And then they give you this other stuff called nitrox, which is instead of 21% oxygen, then you got 34% oxygen. So it helps maybe feel a little bit better. And you could talk maybe a little bit of nitrox.
That would speed things up a little bit because you're lowering your inspired concentration of nitrogen. And so that gives you a bigger gradient for the nitrogen to work its way out and be exhaled, and then everything's good again.
I feel terrible after I scuba dive. I feel tired. I don't know what it is, but I feel terrible. I think those pilots felt terrible too. I don't even feel good after, even if I use that nitrox stuff. I don't know why I do it.
Well, I got a solution to that.
Scuba diver right there.
I'm a sport diver. I've been diving since I was 18. The charts we had to use, you plan your dive and you dive your plan. The last thing you want to do is get the bends. So you decide you're going to go down to just one depth. You stay down for a determined amount of time. And then when you come out, you can remember that time that you spent down there, and then the time delay before you go back in. You use those charts to be able to redetermine how long you got to be able to stay under the minimum of 2 atmospheres of absorption. But today, they got dive computers, just like a watch. And it keeps track of that non-decompression limit. So you can do multi-levels, you just pay attention to that thing, just don't go past that limit. If you do, it'll tell you what to do. And if you don't pay attention, it gets pissed off. And it lets you know. So
That's good.
when you find yourself getting close to your limit, you just go up to a higher level. All of a sudden your numbers increase that you got more time. But at the end of the dive, you come at 15 feet. You do a 5-minute safety stop at 15 feet. And when that timer's up, you just come on out. It's a fun dive. A lot of people get scared because, they don't want to get to the bends. Well, you pay attention to the rules, you won't get it.
It's understood. So.
He's got a special license plate that shows he's a scuba guy, so you can get one of those if you want to go scuba, and then you can talk to Bill if you get to beds. Other questions here. This is pretty deep on atmosphere and things. I think I understand more about that little glass, and every time I open a Coke cup, now I know that's pressure, and I shake it up, it gets all over. I thought it was going to get over your suit. You better not get that on you.
I had enough sense not to open this one that
I was waiting for it to get all over that pretty time, but you didn't do it. Go ahead and do it now. They were wise.
Yeah, I'll give you the bottle. You can show me how to
Okay, any other questions? I've got to tell about a speaker in 2 weeks. He's going to talk about helicopters 1953 to 60. And remember, helicopters have made a difference. All in the military. They started in 1939, went all the way till now. And they're a major difference because they can get to areas that are very difficult to get to. If you look at the Korean War, we had them in World War II, didn't use them in the Korean War, Vietnam War, Afghanistan, they're just used everywhere now. The guy's going to talk about the experiences in the 50s, which is pretty important. So come in 2 weeks, you got your bus ride in 2 weeks, or it's June 5th, whatever day that is. That's a Thursday. But thank you for coming again, and I can't thank Bill McNiece enough.
Thanks for being here. Everyone, have a good afternoon.